If you don't spend a lot of time thinking about tech CEOs, you might not be too familiar with Jensen Huang, who runs NVIDIA. NVIDIA makes chips, graphics processing units, or GPUs.
And for a long time, this was basically the realm of video game nerds. So Jensen Huang was an engineer who basically did not have anything to do in Washington, D.C. because he made this relatively niche product.
That's Amrith Ramkumar, who covers tech policy for the Wall Street Journal.
With the rise of artificial intelligence, it turns out these GPUs and the products and software NVIDIA makes are actually vital. So the company has just gotten gangbusters. Their market value is above $4 trillion now. And the chips they make are really these strategic commodities.
And Huang, who's got a shock of gray hair and always wears a black leather jacket, is at the center of a global fight between the U.S. and China and lots of other countries over who gets his chips. He's an engineer turned CEO turned amateur diplomat.
People in China have nicknamed him Magic Taylor because he has sort of threaded the needle between export restrictions in the U.S. and everything going on in China. He's sort of found a way to keep everyone happy. And it does almost seem like magic how he's been able to pull this off.
After pressing the Trump administration for months to allow NVIDIA to sell chips to China, Huang agreed to an eyebrow-raising deal. NVIDIA will give a sizable chunk of its chip sales to the U.S. government in exchange for the export licenses to sell them. And it all went down in a conversation between Huang and President Trump.
So I said, listen, I want 20% if I'm going to approve this for you, for the country, for our country, for the U.S. I don't want it myself.
And then Jensen wasn't really in a position to say no.
And he said, would you make it 15? So we negotiated a little deal.
And that's how they ended up with it, essentially. And in that same conversation, they were also talking about tariffs, and Jensen turned on his charm and drew the president a picture, basically a diagram showing how tariffs would be counterproductive for the goal of increasing U.S. chip production. And then he sort of played to Trump's ego, and he signed it and gave it to him.
The U.S. will get 15% of the Chinese sales of an NVIDIA chip called the H20. And the same percentage from NVIDIA's competitor, AMD. The deal is unprecedented and potentially unconstitutional.
You're not supposed to charge companies money to export products. And even for specific chip exports out of the Commerce Department like this, you're not allowed to charge a fee to have companies export these products. So there are definitely some legal and security details and hurdles to work out, but definitely fascinating how quickly this all came together and what it could mean moving forward.
Today on the show, the NVIDIA shakedown. Is this a one-off that kicks a little money to American coffers? Or a sign that Trump is moving towards state capitalism? I'm Lizzie O'Leary, and you're listening to What Next TBD, a show about technology, power, and how the future will be determined. Stick around.
The digital world feels more chaotic than ever. Huge data breaches, AI threatening jobs, foreign meddling, that creeping feeling of obsolescence. It's information overload. I'm Dina Temple-Raston, host of Click Here from PRX and Recorded Future News. Want to understand how we got here and how you can get ahead of it all? Listen to Click Here. We can help you make sense of all the noise, wherever you get your podcasts.
You know what doesn't belong in epic summer plans? Getting burned by your old wireless bill. That's why you should switch to Mint Mobile. Even Slate's president, Charlie Kammerer, is using Mint Mobile. And he says more people should be trying this out. It was really easy to switch providers. The SIM card was shipped to his home. They let him use his existing phone, and he didn't even have to change his phone number. Say bye-bye to your overpriced wireless plans, jaw-dropping monthly bills, and unexpected overages. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. This year, skip breaking a sweat and breaking the bank. Get this new customer offer and your 3-month unlimited wireless plan for just $15 a month at mintmobile.com/whatnext. That's mintmobile.com/whatnext. Upfront payment of $45 required, equivalent to $15 per month. Limited time new customer offer for first 3 months only. Speeds may slow above 35 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details.
Hi, it's Willa Paskin, the host of Decoder Ring. And we have a new episode for you all about an article of faith for many Americans.
It's shocking to me that there's this idea that all Britons have bad teeth. This is not a fringe opinion.
It certainly is not.
Why don't you get your teeth fixed?
I live in Britain. I don't want to stand out.
Well, British people have notoriously bad teeth, so...
But does the stereotype about British people have any validity? And if not, why do we think it does?
I was quite keen to sort of dispel that because it's a bit irritating, Americans always thinking their teeth are brilliant.
Might there be something equally strange about American teeth?
They look very, fake. Yeah. Whereas here, I've always had patients tell me, oh, don't make my dentures too white. They actually call it horse teeth.
Find out on Slate's Decoder Ring, wherever you listen to podcasts.
For a while now, we've been thinking about how to cover the emerging cold tech war between the US and China. Both countries want to dominate in AI, to have the best chips, the best models, and the best talent. And until very recently, that meant competition, not cooperation.
The US-China tech war really goes back a long time, but heated up starting in late 2022, 2023, when the Biden administration started placing very broad controls on exports of advanced chips and chip-making equipment. And this was a bipartisan issue. Democrats and Republicans supported it. A lot of national security hawks were really enthusiastic about using these mechanisms to limit China, and they thought that was key to winning the AI race and keeping the U.S. several generations ahead of China in this technology. They didn't just want to amplify U.S. companies, they wanted to really limit what the Chinese could do. And the big advantage for the U.S. is a lot of the technical know-how has been here, and also a lot of the chips have been here, the ability to make them or at least have them manufactured all over the world and have them controlled here. The Trump administration is sending a totally different signal. They're now saying, we're okay staying a generation or two ahead of China, but otherwise we basically want to let our companies export their technology to a lot of the world and even into China in some cases, like we're talking about with NVIDIA and Advanced Micro Devices in this case. A good way to look at it is Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick recently said, the H20 is our fourth best chip.
Yeah, is that true?
It's widely debated whether that's true, but I think it is roughly understood the H20 is not a top-of-the-line chip. That's definitely true. People agree on that. That's a widely understood fact. It still can be used for a lot of things like inference, where you are working with an AI model that's already been trained. You can use those chips to do some very powerful things. That's why some people think you should have tight controls on them. But just in terms of understanding how the administration is looking at it, Commerce Secretary Lutnick says it's roughly the fourth best chip we have, and we're okay giving that to China. So it's a big shift in how Washington has been looking at this, and a lot of national security hawks are quite upset, frankly, about how fast things have changed.
So if you zoom out, this change seems like a huge about face. What happened to cause this shift and to cause it so quickly?
There are a few factors that led to this. I think one that's been overlooked is Huawei has been coming out with new products and basically new competitors to NVIDIA products with its chips and software. And starting in about April, May, in my conversations with administration officials, everyone started taking notice of this. And then you've had Chinese model developers like DeepSeek and big companies like Alibaba. Chinese technology is taking hold in a lot of the world. Countries are using Chinese models for healthcare and some of their own operations, everything. So I think that really scared a lot of people. And administration officials were just very worried that if they were too cautious, they would end up ceding a lot of the world to China and they would end up elevating Huawei internally. And so they viewed it as, like the president said recently, the H20 is obsolete for a lot of U.S. companies who want more cutting-edge technology. They sort of realized they were okay sending what they view as an obsolete chip to compete with an older Huawei chip and kind of not cede that entire market to Chinese companies. So it was, I think, a combo of basically NVIDIA's pressure campaign and their tactics, getting their allies in Washington to spread this narrative, and also administration officials changing how they viewed the AI race, frankly. Like, if you look at the whole plan the administration put out in late July, so much of it is about exporting American technology to the rest of the world. So I think they also realized it would be hard to have these huge restrictions on companies like NVIDIA that kept changing, because NVIDIA designed the H20 specially for China to comply with export controls back in 2023. So yeah, it is a radical shift in how they view the AI industry and also just exporting valuable technology in general. The idea that the government will now take a cut of those sales, that opens up a huge can of worms and, again, many legal and security questions that still have to be answered.
We're definitely going to get into those. But one thing I notice is that certainly the makeup of the foreign policy people around President Trump is very different than it was in the first term. You do not have the same kind of China hawks, both in the administration and even the ones in Congress seem, frankly, much quieter now than they did a few years ago. Has that been a factor?
That's been a huge factor. The China and national security hawks seem to be gone or totally silent from people I've talked to. It feels like they've been totally sidelined and not involved in any of these discussions. And a lot of it is just personnel changes. So earlier this year, President Trump fired several members of the National Security Council who were working on these issues. The State Department under Marco Rubio, who was a hawk on these issues when he was in the Senate, but they've let go a lot of their tech policy people. So just getting rid of a lot of that expertise and those viewpoints, it seems like that's not even a factor or a consideration as much. And it's been really interesting to watch people in Congress, to your point, because a lot of them, I think, internally disagree with a lot of what's going on here, but they don't feel they can stand up and say that and go against the president. You've had some Republicans on like the House Select Committee on China oppose the president on these issues, but a lot of people have been quiet on it, even though in the past they were talking a lot about the need for these types of export restrictions. So that divide is fascinating, and I think highlights this broader tension on the right that we're seeing basically between the pro-tech wing of the Conservative Party and the MAGA movement. So there's a huge split. We saw it with the AI moratorium earlier this year, where some people on the pro-tech side were trying to ban all state AI laws for 10 years and get that included in the one big beautiful bill. And then people like Steve Bannon and others in the MAGA movement were really against that and sort of pushed back, and they were able to prevent that from going through. But these chip exports are another issue where we're seeing that divide come to a head, and it'll likely continue. And what will be fascinating is if you start seeing Chinese AI advances that follow this once the H20s and other chips start going over there, or there is evidence that maybe this is somehow indirectly boosting the Chinese military and China's AI ecosystem, that will be a really interesting moment to see if that sort of challenges some of these assumptions that got us here.
Do we know how much demand there is in China and from Chinese companies for these chips?
It's really hard to say how much demand there is. If you go back to estimates from around April when the chip was banned, Bernstein analysts estimated that there is about $23 billion worth of demand this year for the H20 in China, and that's about 1.5 million chips. So yeah, it's quite a lot. AI is developing so quickly, though, and Chinese companies are so smart at kind of coming up with workarounds that it's not super clear what will happen now. There's a lot that still has to happen, too. The Commerce Department still has to get out these export licenses and execute them in the quantity that NVIDIA and its customers want. And the Chinese government is already starting to play hardball. And since this agreement has been announced and since President Trump has said, I might be open to sending even more advanced chips, China is sort of sending signals that it actually doesn't want the H20, and some people are viewing that as a negotiating tactic. Like maybe they're going to try to push for something even more as the trade talks continue. So this story is far from over, but I do think it's pretty clear the Chinese customers want these H20s and other U.S. chips because they are better. There's also another wild card here, which is this issue of chip security and chip tracking. There's a bill proposed in Congress, basically, that would mandate that you have to have a tracking device in all of these chips. And China is obviously very against that and trying to exert leverage on NVIDIA and others to lobby against it. And the companies are generally against it for many reasons. So they've been lobbying against it, and it's unclear if it will gain traction. But yeah, it's hard to fully know what the true demand is in China or what the true signals are when you have all of these cross currents.
After the break, is this deal with NVIDIA even legal? And what does it say about what Trump might demand of other American companies? When President Trump announced his deal with NVIDIA and AMD earlier this week, both sides framed it as a win. The chip companies could profit from Chinese demand, and the U.S. government could get a healthy cut. But many legal experts were quick to point out there is a reason why this type of arrangement is so uncommon. It's unconstitutional to place a tax on exports. Amrith told me there are some loopholes the Trump administration might use to try to make sure the deal goes through.
It's definitely going to require some creativity on the part of the administration. There are a few legal challenges. So one is the Constitution says you can't tax an export. It is specific in saying that an export from a state. So a lot of these chips are made in Taiwan. So people have said you can kind of use that as a workaround. And then the second legal issue is that the Export Control Reform Act from 2018 that gives the Commerce Department's BIS the authority to oversee all these export restrictions. It basically says you can't charge a fee in return for an export license, and a 15% cut of the sales smells a lot like a fee to most people. So they were saying that experts have said they will need some creativity to maybe argue that it's not an export license fee, it's a general fee for excellence in science and technology or something like that. So as far as who might challenge it, that becomes an interesting question. It seems tough for people to challenge it just because everyone in the tech sector is so dependent on NVIDIA. There are a few companies like the AI model developer Anthropic that are willing to take them on, but to actually sue over something like this and take on the administration, it's hard to see anyone, at least in industry, challenging this. It's also just not clear how this is going to be executed. It seems like right now there's essentially a handshake agreement. So there's not even, as far as we know, like real detail as to what this will mean, how it will work, what the financial structure will work, what the tax implications will be, how you message this to investors. So we've seen this sort of approach from the administration where they make this big splashy announcement, but it will take a long time for those details to get ironed out.
The closest analogy to a deal like this comes from when Nippon Steel, a Japanese company, acquired the storied U.S. Steel. President Trump had opposed the acquisition when he was on the campaign trail, but last month he approved a deal that granted the White House a golden share in the company, which gives the administration significant control. And Amrith says there are more examples of the White House meddling in companies' business in a way we haven't seen before.
We also just saw the president call for Intel's CEO to resign because of his past business ties to China. And that struck people as a bit odd because there was not really new wrongdoing there. The CEO of Bhutan, his previous company, a chip design software company, they recently agreed to pay $140 million for violating export controls and basically working with Chinese companies that the government says it's not allowed to, and that was seen as boosting China's military and things like that. So that definitely got security hawks like Senator Tom Cotton riled up, and he wrote a letter to the company's board and then went on Fox Business talking about this. And then the president put out his Truth Social statement calling for the Intel CEO to resign. But a lot of executives privately were saying, I mean, there's no official new wrongdoing, and you're saying he has to resign, and he's conflicted. And again, it's the government inserting itself in this sort of unprecedented way into how the company's doing business. So, it seems like that this will continue to be a pattern in different areas of the economy and maybe how it shows up. But yeah, this type of export agreement fits that for sure.
I mean, it's fascinating to me. I covered the financial crisis and the nationalization of banks and also auto companies when I covered Congress and the Treasury Department. And back then, there was so much complaint from Congress. We're not hearing that right now.
We are not at all. And again, it's sort of like the opposition has been sort of beaten into submission on these issues. So yeah, the security hawks are pretty quiet, and the people who are all about the government staying out of the private sector are also pretty quiet. So it's interesting too, because a lot of their even tech and AI agenda is about deregulation and letting the companies do their thing. But my colleague Greg Yip had a great column about this recently where he talked about sort of this model of state capitalism with an American twist.
Yeah, what your colleague Greg Yip wrote was essentially that the Trump administration in its economic policy is mirroring many aspects of Chinese state capitalism. I find that to be tremendously ironic, given that we are talking about this, AI Cold War between the U.S. and China.
Yeah, it even goes back a few years. If you go back to the Biden administration and sort of the Chips and Science Act and the Inflation Reduction Act that passed, I mean, those were really unprecedented sums of money going into the economy and specific companies' projects directed by the government. And the Trump administration has really taken that approach and said, we don't even need congressional outlays of money. We're going to make our own decisions and sort of move quickly on these things to insert ourselves into what we view as strategic sectors. And I think it is a result of this envy that a lot of people have in the U.S. for how quickly China can build infrastructure and get things done, particularly in areas like energy and power generation. So I think a lot of people in Washington have come around to the idea that sometimes it's okay for the government to step in certain ways. So I think it's all about finding the sweet spot where you have a consensus in terms of support. And I think with some of the Trump administration's actions, people have said they don't feel the most vetted or fully thought out. And so that's when it could go wrong. And even my colleague Greg wrote, I mean, in a lot of cases, it hasn't gone the best for China, despite what we hear, right? We only hear the success stories and how well their state capitalism works and why it's so effective, all of that. So these experiments by the Trump administration will be fascinating where sort of the results go just because of how quickly these things can change.
Before I let you go, there's one other question that ends up hanging over all of this, which is we are still in this tremendous back and forth between the U.S. and China over tariffs and trade policy. And I guess I wonder, is anything settled while those questions still hang out there?
Absolutely not. So in reporting, we just wrote the story about how Jensen Huang navigated these U.S.-China tensions and was a back-channel diplomat and was successful in securing these wins. But in talking to people around the company and all of that, like they definitely don't feel like it's settled or that they've won, if that makes sense. It's much more feeling like we could wake up tomorrow and need to start this all over again, and this deal could be gone, essentially. So it definitely feels like the broader U.S.-China trade talks are the North Star that everyone is watching, and that all of these other things that happen that are pretty crazy and eventful are notable and worth documenting and talking about, with an asterisk that they're all contingent upon the two sides sort of reaching an agreement and some sort of equilibrium. So we'll see. The latest 90-day extension just happened. So yeah, I think that's what everyone is watching.
Amrit Ramkumar, thank you so much for your reporting and for laying it all out for me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
Amrit Ramkumar is a tech policy reporter for The Wall Street Journal. And that is it for our show today. What Next TBD is produced by Evan Campbell, Patrick Fort, Shayna Roth, and Ethan Oberman. Our show is edited by Elena Schwartz. Mia Lobel is the executive producer at Slate, and TBD is part of the larger What Next family. And if you're looking for more Slate shows to listen to, I recommend you go listen to Tuesday's episode of What Next, which is all about South Park. Taking a few swings at, well, President Trump. All right, we will be back on Sunday with another episode about what happens when you follow up on one of those scam recruiter texts. I'm Lizzie O'Leary. You can go track me down on Blue Sky. I'm at Lizzie O'Reilly. Thanks so much for listening. Talk to y'all soon.
You'll get more than you expect with McValue at McDonald's. Like deals on your late night go-tos when the party goes till dawn. And savings on their faves. So date night always passes the vibe check. Plus, when the fam shows up for the weekend, you can show out for breakfast.
Buy one breakfast sandwich, add one for $1. Only in the app. Limited time only at participating McDonald's. Valid once a day. Must opt into rewards. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.